So I got a comment in one of my videos, maybe a couple weeks ago. Person asked, "What would happen to Bitcoin if Fort Knox is found to be empty? Let's say there's an audit, Fort Knox is empty. What would happen to everything? What would happen to the entire world, basically? What would happen to the legacy financial system? What would happen to Bitcoin? What would happen to bonds?" Any thoughts on this, guys?
My initial thought is that the markets in general hate uncertainty, and they maybe don't think much about what's going on at Fort Knox, but they probably the markets assume that what's going on at Fort Knox is pretty just okay, like they might be missing a little bit, they might, whatever, be fudging the numbers, but it's basically there is probably what the markets have priced in. So if there was all of a sudden proof of, okay, there's literally nothing there, I think there would be a massive fire sale because people would start to think maybe that the U.S. government isn't as solvent as they might think it is, which would mean a fire sale out of even things like bonds, right? A large part of the bond market is U.S. government bonds. So there would be uncertainty about that, which would mean yields would go way higher and bonds would sell, right? Because there's an inverse correlation to those. And because Bitcoin is incredibly liquid and a lot of people that hold it and trade it and don't understand what it is, or they have differing opinions of what it is. So they might think it's a risk on thing. It's incredibly liquid in a buying and selling market. And also the fact that it's open 24/7 as opposed to other markets. So I think the fire sale would go beyond bonds with the uncertainty and risk on assets of stocks, but also into Bitcoin and crypto. I think there would be a lot of money just taken out into cash. And then, people realize, okay, well, we need to put that cash somewhere because even cash isn't safe, right? If you're holding US dollars and you're worried about the US government lying to you about their reserve assets, then you don't want to hold that either. So then you would maybe have some idea about digital gold and Bitcoin, and you might realize, hopefully, that it's a global asset that no central organization, nation controls, and Bitcoin is the clear winner. And people, already have maybe that idea of digital gold, and it can be audited and all of this. So if they do a tiny little bit of research, they would recognize, okay, let's move on beyond this analog gold that isn't even there. We've been tricked for 50 plus years or more. Let's get Bitcoin because it's now, I think it would usher in that quick adoption of it becoming a risk off asset, which I already personally think it is. But I think the market at large would start to recognize the potential of it being a risk off asset. That's my opinion.
Yeah, this is such an interesting thing to think about. And before we started this, we had a brief discussion, and I said, you know what, I think we're all gonna have different kind of thoughts on this, so let's just go with it. And kind of where I started is different now because I definitely see what Forrest is saying here, where I do think originally what would happen there is it would be chaos. Every time there's, as Forrest mentioned there, every time there's uncertainty in the world or people are freaking out, everything just kind of crashes. That goes into cash. People will kind of just take their chips off the table. And I think that the reason why Bitcoin is usually most affected by that is because it's a very liquid market. It's open 365 days a year, 24/7. And so when things are closed at night or on weekends, that comes out of Bitcoin, right? So I do agree with Forrest there in the sense that I do think it would be like a huge panic. I think that a lot of things would crash. I just think it would take a lot longer for people to figure out, why that happens. I don't think it would be a real quick thing where people figure out, you know what, the gold might not be here, but Bitcoin is there. I think it would take quite a while for people to get to that point. So I actually think that gold would skyrocket because of this, because they'd say, you know what, the US government is one of the bigger holders of gold. That gold doesn't even exist. So gold's like super scarce, which, between the three of us, I think we would agree that it's not. I think that there's more gold times 1,000 than we're told. But I think the market's reaction to that would be, okay, there's actually less gold than we thought. So the value of this is more than we initially anticipated here, or we priced in ourselves.
Yeah, I think the price of gold is going to skyrocket. I also do think, though, that maybe I'm wrong here, but I think that Bitcoin is probably going to. I don't think Bitcoin is going to do as badly as we may think,
If
because
this happens,
if this happens, because if there's no gold in circulation, or sorry, if there's no gold in Fort Knox, then I think that the US dollar would immediately just collapse. Because the value of the US dollar is in a way based on the economy of the US as a nation. And the economy of the US as a nation is built on the US government being able to pay back its debts. If it can't pay back its debts, if it's promised us that it has this gold and it doesn't, then why would people want the US dollar? I think the value of stocks is going to collapse, and I don't think it's going to recover. I think the value of bonds is going to collapse, and I don't think it's going to recover because the trust in that system is going to be lost. I think that because Bitcoin and gold are completely separate, they're probably going to skyrocket. I think real estate is going to probably collapse just like everything else because it's just built on that debt. If there's no more, if there's no more trusted system of debt, then that kind of falls apart. I mean, I haven't really done the deep dive on that, just thinking about that. But I mean, I think the people who own Bitcoin, who understand it, they're not going to sell. And
So
no, go ahead.
do you think that it would cause a hyperinflation of the US dollar then if there's lack of trust? And then nominally stocks and Bitcoin wouldn't go down because we compare it to US dollars, right? But in purchasing power it would. But if the value of the dollar was less, then it would take more dollars to buy an asset. But do you think there would be hyperinflation of the US dollar if there was trust lost because of no gold in Fort Knox?
Oh, 100%. But I think stocks would actually suffer though, because we trust all these financial institutions, right? So if we trusted Fort Knox to have all this gold, and we trust all these other financial institutions to hold our stocks for us, that trust suddenly fades, right? And the entire system, the entire financial system is built on trust. If we can't trust the basis of it, the root of it, and the root is that the U.S. government has this gold. If we can't trust that, then how can we trust these banks? Right. I think people are going to panic and they're going to want to get rid of everything as quickly as they possibly can.
And all of these corporations too, what are they holding? What's Apple holding right now on their balance sheet?
Yeah.
Treasury bills, like a lot of them. So if you then through that, if you think about that, like if the US dollar were to collapse, personally, I don't think that this is going to happen. I'm just going to say that, like, I know we're kind of playing through this, but like we've seen the gold coming overseas from London. I think that they're going to have that thing fully stocked, whether it was 2 months ago or not, because again, this would cause absolute chaos. And I think it would have a very negative impact on the US government and the US economy. Even though I think it would be good for gold and Bitcoin, I just don't foresee them letting anybody into Fort Knox unless the gold's there, because it would be that event that triggers, everything kind of coming down. But if we assume that would cause the US dollar to collapse, and we say that Apple's, Nvidia's, all these big companies that everybody has ownership in through their pensions and through their retirement funds, they're all holding cash. That's their balance sheet there. So if that collapses, everything collapses with that. Or am I missing something there? Or like, what do you guys think would happen in that case?
Well, a large part of their market cap isn't their balance sheet, though. It's not like MSTR where everybody values MSTR based on their Bitcoin holdings. It's a small percentage of their market cap. It's usually forward-looking earnings and things like that makes up the majority of their market cap. They would 100% take a haircut because there would be uncertainty in the dollar, and they're an operating company within the U.S., so there'd be uncertainty in the U.S. market as well. So yeah, I do think that you guys are probably correct with them going down. I am curious though about this. You guys both think gold would go higher. I'm not so sure. I mean, again, I don't think any of us have really thought this fully through. We're just talking about it now. But Jory, you mentioned that if that gold wasn't there, then there would be less in circulation. But that gold does exist somewhere. It's just been sold off to maybe China's central bank, or maybe put into jewelry or whatever, right? So I'm just curious, where would the demand? Why would there be demand for gold if there was no gold in Fort Knox?
But you're making the assumption though that the gold actually exists. What if it actually doesn't? What if that gold was never there?
If it was never there? But
Yeah.
how would we know that though? You know,
I mean, that I get what you're saying. Yeah, I get that. But the way that I see it, okay, so let's say the US has that gold. There's that chance that this major holder might sell all of their gold and they could bring the price of gold down. But now
Mhm.
um now it just that chance of that goes to zero, and there's
Right.
no way for the US government to sell a bunch of gold. They were actually weren't they talking about how they wanted to sell, actually Michael Saylor was saying this, but he was saying how they should sell their gold to buy Bitcoin, or they should monetize their gold to buy Bitcoin. So what that would do is it would have flooded the market, and there are definitely people out there who don't want to buy because of that certainty, or because of that uncertainty.
Hmm.
And I think what this will
Interesting.
do is, if they don't have the gold, it'll make it so that other countries may want to buy as much as they can to prevent the US from having it. I don't know. Maybe this is the wrong way to look at it, but
No, I
it's
think
just
you're
that
right, Rajat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
just
kind
that
of how I
supply
see
and
it too.
demand.
And kind of my thoughts on that would be, I agree with that. I think that if you think through it and you say, okay, well, if the US, everybody, like, just think about me as like a very small segment of the market and kind of how I think about things. And I'm looking at gold as a possible investment. I'm looking at real estate. I'm looking at Bitcoin. I'm looking at gold. And the reason why I would go into gold is because we kind of have an idea of how much there is, kind of an idea of who owns it. But then all of a sudden you throw into there that, you know what, one of the biggest pools of gold here actually doesn't exist. So then, is gold actually much more scarce? Because right now, the way I see gold versus Bitcoin, that gold is very abundant. There's gold in the mountains, there's gold in the ground, there's gold at all these different central banks. But like, then I would start questioning, is there really as much gold as I think there is? Maybe I should explore, like maybe I should actually get some gold because it's more scarce than I had originally anticipated. And then you mix that with what Rajat said there in terms of like, the demand might go up because all these countries now might say the US doesn't have any gold. Let's go all in on this and actually become more of a powerhouse than the US government. So that's kind of my thought process of it, but it's tough.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think about that game theory aspect of other nations being like almost seeing it as an opportunity to take advantage of this lack of power, purchasing power that the US government lacks now. So they could they could kind of try to corner the market almost in that way where they could acquire it and be like, hey, we have gold, our currency's solid, don't worry about us. And then, nation or like companies could even flock to them because they look more powerful actually having their gold reserves. That's a potential case for gold buying as well. Yeah. And then, yeah, just like no bag holder, right? Like it's almost like when Germany sold all their Bitcoin, that was just like, I was kind of happy about that. That brought the price down a little bit or whatever. And it was like, well, now we don't have Germany being a bag holder, over
Yeah.
top of us, just looming when that's going to sell, when that's going to flood in the market and lower the price, right? We have more certainty and more diversification of that Bitcoin into other hands, that are probably stronger. So that could happen as well.
I think it's almost like having a certain supply of paper gold disappearing. Right, like if you
Yeah.
just it's basically like getting rid of the supply of gold. Like let's say you have an exchange like FTX. They were essentially creating paper Bitcoin, and they were manipulating the market, making the market think that there's more Bitcoin than what exists. Because what they were doing is they had their client accounts, and they said that, oh, we owe you this Bitcoin, we have it, don't worry. But they actually didn't have it. So all those people weren't buying Bitcoin from somewhere else. So once their holdings disappeared, the price started going up because those people have to buy it back. They have to get that exposure again. But that Bitcoin is never gonna. It never existed in the first place. So basically, what you're doing is you're decreasing the available supply. Again, same thing with gold. If that gold doesn't, let's say you have, 2 tons of gold, and let's say the U.S. is supposed to own 1 ton of it. I know the numbers are a lot bigger than that, but let's say the U.S. is supposed to own 1 ton of it. The U.S. government doesn't actually own it. The reality is that there's only 1 ton of gold, so your supply has just halved, and the price will have to skyrocket because it's not like the people who are buying gold are going to stop buying it. If anything, the people who are buying gold today will want to buy even more because they're thinking, where they're thinking that we should buy it even faster. Like let's say, for example, if you figured out that somebody lost 500,000 Bitcoin, let's say BlackRock lost their keys, and you have a certain amount of Bitcoin, you're going to think, okay, the market hasn't reacted yet. I'm going to buy more because my Bitcoin is
Mm.
essentially worth even more. The Bitcoin that I'm buying is worth even more. I think there's a lot of game theory into this. There's a lot of a lot of different ways of thinking of it. I hadn't really thought of a lot of the points that you guys made before when I first saw the comment. I feel like I'm more confident to answer this question if I do have a conversation on it.
Yeah, it could be simple supply and demand dynamics
Yeah.
just changing. Like even the US, if they got found out no gold, it could actually cause them to start buying gold as well.
Yeah.
Like it could even
Yeah.
make a new customer right there or
Yeah.
a new source of demand even. Which I think
Exactly.
is probably why gold's price has gone up, is because they're, like Jor alluded to, they're trying to stock up Fort Knox because they were maybe a little light. That's my opinion, I think. But yeah.
And
Yeah.
they have been light. So maybe let's wrap this up with kind of our interpretation of why, well, you know, why somebody like us and why we think other people should be looking at Bitcoin versus gold in terms of being able to verify, you know, who owns what, the transparency there, why that's so important for the governments who are, you know, who have these currencies and who are apparently backed by some of this stuff. Like, what makes Bitcoin better than gold in this situation?
Well, you can actually audit it. You can know how much you own. You can, Rajat talked about how there was paper Bitcoin. That's because people allowed a custodian to hold it for them. They left it on an exchange, basically making FTX a custodian, and they were a bad custodian based out of the Bahamas that just stole their Bitcoin and used it for risky trading. So if you don't do that, you can actually move the Bitcoin on chain into your own wallet. You can hold your private keys, you can own it, and it has a true max supply and fixed issuance with a difficulty adjustment that is modeled after how gold is created and mined, but it's locked in time instead of the ground. And therefore, because of all of this and because it's all known, right? Even this is an accounting issue. Why are we even having this conversation? You know, if gold really did solve all the issues of money, one of those issues being accountability, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation because we would know where all the gold is, and that's the case with Bitcoin. It's all public. It's a public ledger. You can know the Bitcoin you actually hold, and it solves this exact issue that gold has.
Looks like Rajat's busy working on something there. So I'll kind of follow that up with, I 100% agree. I think that it is the fact that we can go to a website like El Salvador's and verify based on their address how much Bitcoin they have. I just think that that gives so much more credibility to a country. And as we see like this whole thing play out, I do think it's going to be like country versus country. Which currency will survive? We've had the US dollar for so long. But like if some of these countries start buying Bitcoin and that becomes like the next reserve asset, and they can say, here's how much Bitcoin we have. This is the proof. We don't need an audit. You guys can audit this yourself, you know, at any given moment here. Like think about how much faith somebody would put in that government versus somebody who's being much more, you know, secretive and able to paint their gold or, you know, lock it up and secure it where nobody can get in there. It's two totally different worlds to me.
Yeah, I wanted to actually share my screen here. I was looking for a tweet that I posted, and I thought it'd be pretty funny. 1 second.
Did you
here.
find it?
Yeah, I found it. I was looking for it just now. So, just to show people how the world really thinks. So people say that, oh, gold is going to be the next medium of exchange. We're going to go to a gold standard. I wrote up a scenario just explaining how the world will work on a gold standard. So it's 2054. Bitcoin has failed. The gold bugs like Peter Schiff have convinced everyone that peer-to-peer exchanges of gold are the way to go. The world is now on a gold standard. You run a coffee shop. A customer walks in to buy coffee. All they have is a 1 kilogram bar of gold. So they take out their chisel and their scale to carve off 0.0054 grams of gold. You take the gold and you send it to your gold purity specialist to confirm that the gold is pure. 3 to 5 business days later, the test confirms that the gold is real. You call the customer back to the shop to get their coffee and complete the transaction.
Love that.
It sounds
Insane.
it sounds
you think of it?
incredibly efficient.
It's crazy, right? Because how do you confirm that gold is real?
Yeah.
It's just so much harder. And then with Bitcoin, again, going back to what we're talking about here, because Bitcoin is so much better than gold, I think Bitcoin will continue to, at some point, maybe it'll drop a little bit if there is no gold in Fort Knox. Maybe it'll drop for a bit, but people will figure out that Bitcoin is better money, and that's
100%.
what'll just push it back up. So
I think that that's what this leads to as well, is that people over time slowly. Like this is kind of just shocking everybody's world. Like I remember when I first got into Bitcoin, it wasn't because I was, interested in like the price going up or anything like that. What really caught my attention within Bitcoin was like the monetary aspect, the history. And like I didn't at that point know what our currency was backed by. I kind of just assumed that it was backed by gold. So that was a big light bulb moment for me where I was like, holy, like nothing's behind this. What am I holding? Why am I storing my time and value in here? So I think that this is going to be kind of a light bulb moment for a lot of people, either way, whether Fort Knox has gold or not. Just the fact that we don't know. I think that that's going to open a lot of people's eyes, and eventually all roads, lead to Bitcoin, I think.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this up. Do you guys think that Fort Knox has the gold? Yes or no?
It might have it now if enough planes have landed from London. I don't know. It's purely speculation. I think they probably have a lot of gold there. I don't know if they have it all.
Yeah, I think that's the difference here. With Bitcoin, if somebody publishes their address, there's no more speculation. With gold, there's always going to be speculation. Unless you can go into the vault and check for yourself, you're just trusting somebody else to do it for you.
Even still, are you going to core every single one of those, make sure there's no tungsten wrapped gold and chemically test it like you suggested in that tweet? Like, it's very hard to verify gold, or you have to melt it all down and then there's cost to that, right? So there's none of that with a Bitcoin node. You just run it, on an old computer. Like, what's the cost of that, right? Almost nothing. And you can verify all of your Bitcoin.
Which leads to possibly a follow-up episode of this of, what if the US actually has more gold than we think they do? And would they be willing to share that with us? Because that might have an impact on the value of it. So I think that the gold is there. I think it will be there when they open the doors. And hopefully anyways, because I'm not ready for this kind of chaos quite yet. But anyways, thanks fellas. Another great one. And we'll talk to everybody soon.
Awesome.